Hi everyone, Ahmad Sadiq from Land Trust Title of Central Florida. Let's talk title. Today I wanted to talk to you about the title process. I'm going to talk to you about what we do here at the title company, who we're communicating with, why we're communicating the way we are, and what it is that we're doing and why it's important. So when we're getting the contract, we're starting the process of researching the title of the property. So what that means for us is we're taking a look at the history of the actual physical property itself, and we're also taking a look at both the buyers and the sellers. The history of the property is going to tell us if the property has any kind of encumbrances on it, any other liens on the property, if there's any other issues that we need to take care of that might be problems in the history of the title of the property. We're also taking a look at if there's any issues with the seller. And what I mean by that is we need to make sure that there's no debts or liens or encumbrances that are associated with that particular individual. If there is, we need to take care of that by the time of closing, or make a determination that it's something that we can move forward with, knowing that it's there in public records. We're also going to take a look at the buyer. And when I say the buyer, what we're looking at most likely in that type of a scenario is if the buyer happens to be a corporation or an LLC. We need to make sure that the entity is properly licensed in the state of incorporation. We also want to make sure that we have all of the documents necessary to make sure that the people signing on behalf of the entity have the authority to do so. Let's take a step back. We talked about a lot there in a short period of time, so let's focus back on the history of the property. So what we're looking at is, primarily we're looking for mortgages that are on the property. These are going to generally be mortgages that were used to purchase the property in the first place, and then we're going to look for UCCs, which are generally going to be associated with pool equipment, solar equipment, those types of additional add-ons to the property that are done either at the time of the purchase of the property or at some time after the fact. We also need to pay these off before closing happens. And then we're also going to look to see if there's any issues in the history of the property. So our responsibility at the title company is not only to look at what's going on with the property as of the time the seller took ownership of the property, but we have to go even further back to make sure there's no other issues that another title company might have missed in the past. And if there are, we need to determine whether we need to take care of that, and if we do, what the proper steps are going to be. Common issues that we see associated with that are going to be issues with the legal description of the property, issues with the way that the title was vested at some point, and issues with the way that any particular document may have been recorded, whether there was the proper witnesses on it, whether documents were properly notarized, and we need to make a determination if any corrective work needs to be done. Because again, our goal at the title company is to ensure that the seller sells their property free of any issues related to the legal ownership of the property, and then to make sure the buyer takes ownership of the property without any issues related to anything prior to their ownership of the property. So that's going to entail us going back in time, taking a look at what's going on with the property, and eradicating those issues by the time we get to closing. Then we have to, what we mentioned before, is we have to make sure that there's no issues related with the seller themselves or himself or herself, and those are things like child support payments or credit card debt that turn into a judgment and a lien against that particular individual, and then anything related to, let's say, county taxes or federal income taxes that we have to take care of at the time of closing. And then we have to make sure that the buyer is properly set up and that everything that we need to make sure that we're properly vesting title into that buyer we have in our hands, and we can ensure that the documents are properly signed and titled in the name of the correct buyer. Ultimately, the goal is that once we've taken a look at the history of the property and made sure that we are able to convey property properly from the seller to the buyer, we continue our communications with the buyer and the seller. And most importantly, we begin communicating with lenders if the buyer happens to be using a loan to purchase a property. And we do, one of the most important parts of the transaction, which is balancing numbers with the lender. This is going to ensure that we're properly prorating things on the closing disclosure, including property taxes, homeowners associations. If there's a tenant in the property, we're prorating the remaining portion of the lease. And we're also making sure that we're taking any security deposit that's held by the seller or the seller's management company and properly conveying that to the buyer or the buyer's representative. We're also plugging in the lender's numbers. We're plugging in escrows, impounds, things like pre-collected property taxes, pre-collected homeowners insurance premiums. And once we get to our final figure and our figure looks the same as the lender's, we're properly balanced at that point, and we can produce our final documents sign, get everyone closed, and then get everything recorded that we need to so that we can go ahead and issue a title policy. And we'll talk about the title policy on our next video. But thank you guys so much for taking your time and listening to us. I really hope that I've been able to bring some additional value to you guys today.